somewhere off the coast of Dover, 5 kilometers down, 20 bottles of beer have been sitting in total darkness since 1864. No light, no time, just cold, pressure, and silence. And now, scientists want to bring what's inside them back to life? Stay with me, because this story gets stranger. Close your eyes for a second. Not really, keep watching, but imagine it anyway. It's November 27th, 1864. You're standing on the deck of a sailing bark called the Mindora. The English Channel is doing what it always does this time of year. Thick fog, a bite in the air, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. A week ago, this ship left London. Its next stop, halfway around the world, is Vancouver. Somewhere below your feet, packed carefully into the cargo hold, are crates of bottled stout. Dark, rich, still young. Made just months earlier at a brewery on St. James's Gate in Dublin. Nobody on this ship thinks of it as anything special. It's just cargo. Just beer, headed for thirsty colonists on the other side of the world. And then, out of the fog, comes another ship. There's no time to react. Wood splinters. Water rushes in. And in the confusion that follows, the Mindora begins to sink. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, inevitably, the way ships have gone down for as long as there have been ships. Down through the cold water, down past the light, down to the seabed, 5 kilometers off the English coast, where it settles into the mud and the dark and simply stops. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because for the Mindora, time stopped that day too. While you and I kept going, while the world fought wars, invented airplanes, split the atom, put a man on the moon, built the internet, and somehow ended up here, right now, watching a video on a screen that fits in your pocket, the Mindora didn't move. Not an inch. Down there at the bottom of the channel, nothing changed. No sunlight ever touched it again. No warmth, no oxygen rushing in to speed up decay. Just 4 degrees Celsius, constant and unblinking, and the crushing, patient weight of the ocean pressing down year after year after year. 162 years of that. Think about what usually happens to beer left in your fridge for 2 weeks. Now, stretch that out. 10 years, 50 years, 100, 162. By every rule we think we understand, there should be nothing left down there worth looking at. Just broken glass, rust, and mud. Except that's not what the divers found. When explorers finally located the wreck and began surveying it, they found something that shouldn't have been possible. Up to 20 bottles of stout, corks, and glass still intact, resting exactly where they'd been packed away in 1864. Untouched, unopened, waiting. And I want you to sit with that word for a second. Waiting. Because that's really what this story is about, isn't it? Not a shipwreck, not even beer, really. It's about something being preserved so perfectly, for so long, that it becomes a message. A sealed letter from one century to another, and we just happened to be the ones who found it in our mailbox. Here's the part that turns this from a curiosity into something almost magical. The cold, the darkness, the pressure, the exact conditions that make the bottom of the English Channel such an inhospitable place for a human being, turned out to be the perfect vault for something else entirely. Beer, it turns out, ages the way certain things only can when nothing disturbs them. No temperature swings, no light breaking down the compounds inside, no oxygen sneaking in through a compromised seal. Just stillness. Absolute, uninterrupted stillness for over a century and a half. And inside stillness like that, something remarkable can survive. Not just the liquid, not just the flavor compounds that might tell us what beer actually tasted like in Victorian England. Something alive. Yeast. The living organism responsible for turning sugar into alcohol. the same living organism that gave this particular stout its character back in 1864, potentially still there, dormant, sealed inside glass, sleeping through wars and revolutions and the entire 20th century without ever knowing any of it happened. Now, let that sink in for a moment. Somewhere in those bottles might be a living fingerprint of a recipe that no longer exists anywhere else on Earth. That idea that a taste, a flavor, an entire brewing process from a lost century might still be recoverable is exactly what pulled in two explorers named Stefan Panis and Paweł Truszynski. They didn't just want to look at the bottles. They didn't want to photograph them, catalog them, and quietly place them in a display case somewhere. They wanted to wake them up. So, they did something almost nobody thinks to do with a 162-year-old shipwreck. They called in a microbiologist. Working with a professor at Leuven University, the team began the delicate process of examining what was actually left inside those bottles at the molecular level, searching for yeast DNA that might still be viable, still readable, still usable. And to make sure they weren't chasing a fantasy, they brought in the one institution on Earth with the authority and the archives to confirm exactly what they were looking at. The Guinness archive itself, at St. James's Gate in Dublin, the very birthplace of the beer now resting at the bottom of the sea. They gave the project a name that tells you everything about how big they're thinking. Project Jurassic Beer. Yes, like Jurassic Park. Like pulling something ancient and thought to be gone forever back into the world of the living. Except, instead of amber and mosquitoes and dinosaur DNA, it's a shipwreck and glass bottles and yeast. The comparison sounds playful, almost like a joke you'd make at a pub. But underneath the joke is a real, serious scientific ambition to sequence what remains, understand it, and potentially recreate a beer that hasn't existed anywhere on Earth since Abraham Lincoln was still alive. Panis and Truszynski have described what they're attempting in a phrase I haven't been able to stop thinking about. They call it liquid time travel. And when you actually sit with that phrase, it stops sounding like marketing and starts sounding like something closer to the truth. Because think about what taste actually is. It's not just flavor, it's memory, it's context. It's the entire world a thing came from, compressed into a single sensory experience. When you taste something, you're not just activating your tongue, you're reconstructing, for one fleeting moment, the conditions that produced it, the ingredients, the hands that made it, the place, the time. If this project succeeds, if that dormant yeast can genuinely be revived and used to recreate the original 1864 recipe, then somewhere down the line, someone is going to raise a glass and taste something that hasn't touched a single living person's lips in over a century and a half. Not a modern reproduction guessing at old techniques. Not a marketing gimmick dressed up in vintage packaging. An actual, direct, unbroken chemical link to a specific batch of beer, brewed in a specific year, by specific people whose names we'll probably never know, loaded onto a ship that was never supposed to sink. That's not just archaeology. That's not just brewing. That's resurrection. In the most literal sense science currently allows. Picture Dublin in 1864 for just a moment. St. James's Gate is already decades into brewing what will become one of the most recognized drinks on the planet, though nobody working there that year has any idea of that future. To them, it's simply the job. Barrels rolled across cobblestones, steam rising off vats in the cold morning air. A living, breathing craft passed down through hands that learned it from other hands, with no written formula quite capturing what those hands actually knew. Recipes back then weren't lines of code, they were instinct. Temperature judged by touch, timing judged by smell. 1,000 tiny decisions nobody bothered to write down because everybody assumed there'd always be someone there to make them. Nobody in that brewery ever imagined those exact choices, that exact batch, that exact strain of yeast quietly doing its work, would end up sealed in glass, sitting in the dark at the bottom of the English Channel, still intact when their great-great-grandchildren were already gone. And yet, here we are. Every choice made in that brewery on an ordinary day in 1864 is still encoded, right now, inside those bottles, waiting to be read like a message written in a language we're only just now learning to translate. That's what makes the DNA work so delicate and so slow. Yeast is alive, but barely, and barely is doing a lot of work in that sentence. 162 years is an eternity for a single-celled organism. Most of what's in those bottles may already be gone, degraded past recovery, lost to time the way almost everything eventually is. But most isn't all. And in science, in archaeology, in every good mystery this channel has ever told you about, it's the tiny surviving fraction that ends up mattering most. One viable strand. One dormant cell that never quite died. That's all it takes to turn a shipwreck into a bridge across a century and a half. And here's what makes this story land so hard, at least for me. It's not really about beer at all, is it? It's about how much of the past is still down there, waiting, in places we simply haven't looked yet. We tend to think of history as something that's finished, locked away in books, in museums, behind glass, safely dead and unchangeable. But the Mindora is proof that history isn't always finished. Sometimes it's just paused. Sometimes it's sitting in the dark at the bottom of the ocean, perfectly preserved, patiently waiting for someone curious enough and stubborn enough to come looking. Think about how close this almost never happened. If that ship hadn't collided in exactly that spot, if the wreck had settled somewhere shallower, somewhere the currents could reach it, somewhere light could filter down and slowly, quietly destroy everything inside those crates over the decades. If nobody had ever gone looking with the right equipment, at the right depth, at the right moment in scientific history when we finally have the tools to actually extract and read DNA this old. Any one of those variables shifting even slightly, and this story doesn't exist. Those bottles stay down there forever, an answer nobody ever gets to hear. But none of that happened. Instead, against every reasonable expectation, the conditions lined up. The ship sank in the right place. The cold did its job, the seals held. And 162 years later, right when the science finally caught up to the mystery, someone found it. I don't know about you, but there's something almost eerie about that kind of timing, as if the wreck was simply waiting for us to be ready. So now the real work begins. The archive verifying every detail against historical brewing records, the microbiologists coaxing ancient, sleeping yeast cells back into activity, the slow and careful process of turning a shipwreck discovery into something you might actually be able to taste one day. And if they pull it off, what gets poured into that first glass won't just be beer. It'll be a direct line back to 1864. A message finally delivered, 162 years late. Because that's the real secret hiding in this story, and honestly, in almost every story we cover here. The past isn't as far away as we think it is. It's not gone, it's not silent, it's just waiting in the dark, in a wreck, in an archive, in a bottle nobody's opened yet, for someone to come looking. And when they do, it speaks. So here's my question for you. If the past really is still out there, sealed up and waiting in places we haven't thought to look, what else is still down there? What other bottles, what other letters, what other secrets are sitting in the cold and the dark right now, patiently outlasting every single one of us, just waiting for their moment? If a story like this pulls you in the way it pulled me in, stay close. Subscribe and let's go looking for the next one together. Because trust me, this isn't the only thing history has been hiding.